Welcome to Athletes and Entrepreneurs, the Alumni Journey. I'm Rob Finkelstein, founder and CEO of Alumni Direct, where we've created a centralized platform to help athletes and other alumni to network and connect through their affinity groups, through their alumni groups, and tap into various resources in mental health, financial literacy. But more importantly, this show is all about athletes transitioning out of sports. It's such a major issue today between financial issues, health issues, career services, a lot of different things. And we interview former college and professional athletes, and we talk about their transition out of sports into successful business leadership and entrepreneurship. So happy today to have on with us Mike McQuillan. How you doing, Mike?
Intro was outstanding. You almost blew up my headphones with that. Welcome, but we are still here.
Well, that's great. I got a little excited there. So Mike was a college wrestler. So I think you are now either the second or third wrestler that I've had on the program. He wrestled at SUNY Cortland. Before he did that, though, he served in the Marines. Thank you so much for your service, Mike. We really appreciate it. And then once he got out, he's been in the fitness industry and the speaking industry. He was a trainer. He works with different people. Ultimately, today, he is a speaking coach, and he works with student athletes as well as in the fitness space, talking to different ways to do it. He'll get all into that because I'm not doing it justice, Mike. I'm sorry.
So leave it to me. That's what I do.
That's right. That's what he does. And he probably does. You do podcasts too?
And yes, not as good as this one, but yes, I have.
There you go. All right. So talk about growing up playing sports and how it shaped you leading up into school.
I always say that playing a sport is not something you do separate from education. It's part of your education growing up. You can't put a grade behind what it's like to work on a team, to own up to your responsibilities. And quite frankly, as an athlete, as a child, you've actually got responsibilities to your teammates that you don't have to your classmates in school. Now, they don't tell you that when you sign up for T-ball. They just say, get in the back of the van, we're going. I still remember being 5 years old playing T-ball, and we had to hop in the back. The coach's name was Carmine. We hop in the back of his cargo van. The whole team's bouncing around. That kind of team-building activity, you're not going to get that by from a spelling book. So that I didn't even know it, but that was definitely my formative years started there.
Yeah, did you have a dream of being a professional athlete? And if so, like what sport?
Professional athletes, I wouldn't say that. See, growing up, the only sport I played in the league was baseball. I was good, but I wasn't that good. Nobody's scoping me. So it wasn't like that. Obviously, growing up a Yankee fan, there are certain fantasies about being on Yankee Stadium and being the first one to hit a home run out of the stadium. But it wasn't really something I aspired my whole life. But these are definitely the people I looked up to. Dave Winfield. If Dave Winfield had called me up and said, hey, Mike, this is Big Dave. I want you to brush your teeth and go to bed early because I'm going to see you in school tomorrow. It'd have been, yes, sir, Mr. Winfield. So those are the people I looked up to. So whatever ambitions I had, I definitely patterned myself after athletes.
Yeah, I see that too. I mean, I always joke around. I did want to be a professional baseball player myself. I'm a big Mets fan. Tom Seaver was my guy growing up, and then Mike Piazza and all that. But anyway, talent wasn't there either for me, and so I do podcasts and other things today. So let's get into athletes transition out of sports. As I mentioned, it's such a major issue, and I think a lot of it, lack of education, maybe a little bit too with athletes. So when you were at SUNY Cortland, were there any type of classes or workshops that were going to help athletes as they ultimately transition out of sports?
Not only were there zero options and opportunities and resources available, there were less than zero resources available. Because your career resources are limited enough anyway in a college for so many reasons. You and I have talked about this. There's a real disconnect between your academic departments and the Career Resource Center. The departments don't want the Career Center to know they're not teaching you any career skills in these departments. It's kind of self-indulgent. But at least you as a student, you have the Career Resource Center. You can go to resume workshops. You can go to job fairs. But if you're an athlete, you don't have that time to do that. On top of that, the people you're with, that as motivated as athletes are, a lot of times they live in the moment. And people say, people are not, basketball practice, football practice, say, wow, this is such a character builder. I can feel my career potential growing every time the whistle blows. A lot of times they live in the moment. And even those who are thinking long term for their career, the people they hang out with on the team, they're in different majors. Most of the time, the odds are they're not going to be in the same course of study. So you're really isolated in your career search, and the resources are fewer. And on top of that, there is a stigma. It is not fair, but there is a stigma that athletes play a sport instead of getting an education. That's another stigma. It's not fair, but I'm not here to talk about what's fair. You
Right.
put all of that together, it can hurt you. But you do have one advantage that overrides all the things that work against you. And that's the fact that you have a story to tell and you have an audience that wants to hear it. You know how to communicate what you do and what drives you and carry lessons that are one in, one out. Lessons for other athletes to inspire them, and lessons outside the sports world so you get mainstream appeal for your sport, for your team, and for who you are at your core.
Yeah, I agree. Some of the sports too, I always talk about these football players, some of it where they're just so zoned in, and not that as a wrestler, I ran cross country track in college, but I think there's that expectation, and they don't, like you said, they don't have the opportunities to necessarily partake in internships and things like that. So there's definite need for that. And I think that's where we talk about trying to work with schools and creating potential workshops or different curriculum that kind of rides along with what they're doing now. And not only for the current athlete, but for the alumni athlete as well. Because I feel like the alumni athlete gets forgotten. Somebody might be out like 2 years, 5 years, and they're struggling, and they don't have that ability to come back to their alma mater and get things like that. So other things that we like to talk about too, and this kind of relates to alumni connection. Obviously, Alumni Direct, it's important to us. Talk a little bit, when you were in school, was there any kind of push to have alumni coming back, alumni athletes, to work either within that particular sport with their athletes, like wrestlers coming back to work with wrestlers, or football or basketball, whatever? Did you see that back then?
In the wrestling team, no. In all fairness to the head coach, it was his second year as a coach, so he didn't really have the contact with the legacy and the athlete. There's been a few turnovers of the coach, and he stayed for almost, he recently left, but he was there almost 20 years. So in all fairness to him, he didn't have alumni to reach out to. So I have to talk to some people to see if they have that connection. Now, I'm in South America now, but at the time that I was coaching, or I was in that space, I'd see my old teammates. There's always a wink and a nod. Yeah, we went through this together. And so there is that support structure. But as far as going back to the college and having an actual program where people are connected to find job opportunities, I don't see that. I definitely didn't see it in my time.
You're out of country now, but do they? Are you seeing any movement from the school now that you know of, as far as trying to engage, alumni athletes to come back?
Well, nobody's reaching out to me, and they know I was on the wrestling team. They know I spoke at the first Veterans Day ceremony there. The president of the college personally introduced me. So they should know who I am. Not like I've got a statue to me there, but somebody should, oh, what about that guy? So there's no directory of any kind. And I will say, it does bother me, because the fraternities that are nothing more than drug cartels, they have that.
Right.
You can reach out to somebody in Beta. You can reach out to somebody in Delta Chi and get a job, even though the things they do on campus shouldn't be allowed on the safe streets of America anywhere. They have that alumni reach out, but the athletes don't. That's a problem.
Yeah, and I think it's a little bit of a two-way street, but I think a lot of times, from my experience, what I've seen too is just the schools aren't reaching out, and they should. I mean, like I was on a call with from my school, and we had a former one of our former like a Hall of Fame football player from the school, played 10 years in the NFL, and we were talking to the athletic department, talking about, hey, what can we do to help? And he's like, tap me in, want to help. And I think there's definitely people that do want to come back. And in these conversations I've had with different athletes along the way in my podcast, some schools are better than others with it, and do try to tap in to that, because I think it's important. I mean, people want to help out, and I think the athletes will listen to people that have been in their shoes. And then also, not only the current athletes, but again, I talk about, some of those alumni athletes that could really utilize that help. So hopefully we'll start seeing more and more movement in engaging alumni. And, one thing that kind of goes hand in hand with that is networking, connecting. And, you and I, that's how we connected. And so talk a little bit about the importance of that, especially while you're still playing your sports.
Well, kids these days and their social media, hopefully use it the right way because they're light years ahead of where we are and how to use these little thingies they carry around everywhere. They know how to use the social media. We've got to teach them not how to use it technically, but how to use it professionally, how to connect with people, somebody who knows somebody. And it's been a process for me in the solopreneur space. I learned about networking through Harvey McKay and just keep in touch with people. But how to ask for a connection, that's something new. Because it's not likely that I'm going to run into Rob Finkelstein on the street, or is it Finkelstein? On the street. Okay, Rob Finkelstein on the street and say, hey, Rob, listen, I'm a speaking coach. Are you hiring? Well, yes, Mike. As a matter of fact, I am. It's not going to happen that way. But how it's somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody. And so, can I have a job? Sure, why not? It doesn't happen that way. You have to get your ask in gear. Know specifically what you want. So if you're, where I went to school, it was a teacher's college. So that's why the networking doesn't help as much because they get a teaching with a school district. But if you know you're a business major and you know what, you worked in a store and you want to get into retail management, who do you know in retail management? Somebody knows somebody who has a cousin who's a vice president of logistics and supply chain for Staples. Somebody knows somebody. The more specific you are, and it's likely it's second or third connection, include that in a conversation. You're not imposing on anybody. You're not asking them for money. You're not putting a gun to their head. You just let people know this is what I'm looking for. It will come up. In fact, you and I connected you to a client of mine because he specializes in training companies that hire recent college graduates. That was a stab in the dark for you two to ever meet. We just happen to be a mutual connection.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's, I always tell people that too. It's not necessarily, I mean, people say it's not, or two, who knows you, but for me, it's more about, you just never know who that person is. So you brought up some great examples. I mean, you could be a friend of yours or somebody, a connection that they're not in that space that you're looking for, but they know that person that is. And I think it's also really important to kind of foster that pay it forward type attitude. And, you're certainly that way. I'm that way. We're just, how can we help each other out? And I think, it's,
yes.
I think when you take that approach, it's really successful. And then even going back to like, think about when you're younger and as a high school athlete, I mean, you're not really taught how to do that, but you've got your friends, their parents, they're doing different things, your coaches. So, we encourage, start at a young age. And I think what happens is some of these athletes too, when they're done playing, like if they haven't done it, all of a sudden they're expecting, okay, well, I'm out real world now. I'm going to get this job. I'm going to get 6-figure income, and maybe not so much because they didn't build that proper network. So we definitely encourage people to do that.
Yes, I can say a lot about that. Listen, we've all been lied to. All you have to do is go to college for 4 years and you'll come out and you'll have a job waiting for you. And it doesn't work that way. You are responsible, and this is the number one thing I want everybody to take away from this. You are responsible for your own professional development. Because you might major in psychology, you might major in sociology. You're not going to get job skills in the classroom. You're going to get thinking skills in the classroom. You're responsible to build your professional skills parallel to your academic thinking and ability to do research. And networking, you're never going to learn that in school. I will say this, you talk about people with their parents, and I was guilty of this as an adolescent, constantly on stage, constantly putting on a show, trying to impress people so they can come to me and say, Mike, you are so impressive. Let me just give you a job, or my father's going to get me a job, rather than knowing specifically, this is what I'm all about and who do you know, so I can make the connection, do the outreach.
Yeah, Greg, we got a little dog in the background.
Hey, Bulldogs are in the house. Cortland was the Red Dragons. We have dragons. Hey, that's real life. See, your dog agrees. Hey, doggy, who do you know?
Yes, Hershey, who do you know?
Hershey. Listen. If you're in the dog food business, Rob apparently is running low on doggy biscuits, so reach out to him for some home delivery of dog food. Now, that is how you network.
Absolutely. So This is all the fun question I like to ask. Two questions. So the first one is, what advice would you give to freshmen in college, Mike?
Freshman in college. Well, you've probably received a whole lot of advice already, and I can't promise it's always going to be good. Is this freshman in college specifically to
You? Like
athletes?
if you were able to go back in time and looking back at your life, what advice would you give to yourself? Now you were a little bit older because you said
Yeah.
you were in the military, but just what advice would you give to yourself?
Okay, well, providing I would actually listen to my own advice, I would say, okay, well, listen, I was a non-traditional student. I would say, be a traditional student. You're not on the fast track. It's the same for you. Even if you have that military background, you still have to do it traditionally. I tried so many shortcuts, it ended up taking me 6 years to graduate. That's what the shortcuts did for me. I thought I could fast track and just get it over with. And I would say savor the experience. You're not far behind on life. I thought my life was running away from me because people my age had already graduated, had jobs, and respect in the workplace. And I was a freshman doing entry level manual labor, and I wanted to get ahead as quickly as possible. It's not like that. If you're hurrying up to do that, you're never going to get there. That was a mistake I made, was thinking I could just fast track my education because I was already in the Marines. That was an absolute mistake. Another thing I would have done because I started at the University of Alaska, believe it or not. But by the time I got to SUNY Cortland, the one mistake I made was where I chose to live. Because I lived at this point I'm 27, 28 years old, and I'm living among teenagers, and that was a mistake. Even though you want to be there, keep a safer distance, and I would have definitely done that differently.
And what about fast forward to senior year? What advice would you give to senior Mike?
You know what? I crushed my senior year. I would say this: don't take that job at the bank. Well, I would have to say my senior year. I would say, my junior year, I did a semester in Costa Rica, and that's when I knew I wanted to do something abroad. If I were to do it again, I would have done another semester abroad. I would have gone to Spain. That's something I would personally. I'm not saying, hey, if you're watching this right now, Alumni Direct, go to Spain, but I would have gone to Spain.
Oh, that's great. So let's move to now the transition. Your transition out of sports. I mean, your whole life, you're growing up, you're playing sports. I mean, there was a little bit of a break, when you're in the Marines, but then when you got to college, now you're wrestling there. So when your playing days, so to speak, were over, how was that transition out into getting into banking, getting into these other things?
It was harder to transition into sports than transition out. I'm talking about during that lull. Now, I've always been physically active, running. My other passion is you're a cross-country runner as well, so I don't have anybody to wrestle,
Right.
But I do have a place to run. So I kept that going no matter what. But getting back into the groove, being 26, 27 years old, wrestling people almost 10 years younger than I was and getting my butt kicked, that was a tougher transition. It was a tougher transition to define my identity when I'm looking up to these kids because they're better wrestlers, but I've got life advice for them. That balance, it was tougher to transition into it. Working in a bank was the worst job I've ever had. I felt like I sold my soul. Due respect to the people who take care of our money. Either you're for it or you're not, but it was not the sedentary life. It drove me nuts. I wasn't myself anymore. When I went to work at the gym again, it was incredible to get that back. I'm getting paid for this? It's not work. But that's what got me the in to teach the certification course for personal trainers at a career institute, and that's what got me into teaching. So it's not, and again, just like I said, some people think that sports are an alternative to an education, or that fitness is an alternative to a career. No, it's a very legitimate career, and there's a lot that you can do with it. So transitioning in was harder than transitioning out because I've always been physically active.
Yeah, and I think that makes a lot of sense, obviously, to do that. And then with the transition out of sports, a lot of times what we're finding is depending what sport, the athletes identify themselves as that sport. So you're
Oh
Mike the
yeah,
wrestler, I'm Rob the runner, it could
yeah,
be Susie the swimmer, Joe the baseball player. But I think
yeah.
that's where the challenge comes into play. And I think from some of these other sports like wrestling and running and maybe
Mm.
soccer, like where there's not as much of an avenue of being a professional athlete, I think,
Right.
people tend to be a little more grounded in looking at the big picture of when they're done. But maybe give some advice to athletes as they are, coming up on the end of the time, whether it's unfortunate from an injury, whether it's just the end of their schooling, or even if they're fortunate to be a professional athlete, but when they're done, give some advice to them on how to kind of handle that transition.
Sure. We've got two choices. You can either do it or you can use it. I wrestled in college. A few people went into professional mixed martial artists, became fighters. In fact, one of my teammates became UFC champion. I scored 2 points on him in a semester. It was like wrestling. He was like getting hit by a bus. But I did score a 2 point reversal on him. Maybe he remembers it. Other people went into the fitness world opening their own gyms. I know a few CrossFitters just because it's pretty, not say easy, but the process to open your own CrossFit is a lot more efficient than maybe a regular traditional gym. So there are those things available to you. So you have a choice of either doing it or using it. So there's a way to apply it. Me, the reason I wrestled in college is because I wanted to coach. And I became a coach. And I did that for a couple of years before I moved here. And now it's been over 10 years, and some of my old wrestlers, and one just finished medical school, another one's about to wrap up law school, and they're so appreciative because I coached in a pretty affluent area where the parents didn't push sports and a lot was given to them. And they worked hard academically, but a lot of it was given to them in life. And having that lesson of having to work for it and earn it meant so much to them in their lives. They're so grateful for it now. That's forever. The influence you have on people is forever. You might not be doing the sport, and I understand the boy. I understand. I want to get on a mat right now. I'm 47 years old, and look what all this wrestling did to me. I want to get on the mat now. I hit the gym last night. I hit it hard. I haven't done it I didn't train like this when I was wrestling in college. I didn't know as much as I do in the gym. So of course, I want to get in there and do it. There's a way to apply what you learned without competing in the sport.
Yeah, I think those are keywords of advice there. I mean, we always talk about, I talk about like the athlete, the DNA, the skill set, something that I think companies want to hire athletes, and what happens is a lot of them, if they don't necessarily, the athletes themselves aren't looking at it that way. I mean, I bring this story up a lot, but one of my guests was a former CEO of a couple large companies, and he implored athletes that, people want to hire you. You've got, the leadership skills, you got the persistence, determination, just everything is there. So, we encourage athletes you've got a lot to offer. So don't just look at yourself as that sport. You've got another, could be 25, 30, 40 years out in the work world, so to speak. And so find what you're passionate about and know that people want to hire athletes.
I will say that now it does depend on the company culture because some
Sure.
people look down their nose at athletes. But I know somebody who's very high up as a vascular surgeon. He is the director of a team at a big shot hospital in New York City. And he said, we always look for people who played a sport. They don't want to know how many trophies you've won.
Right.
They don't want to know. In fact, with my workout partner for 4 years in high school wrestling, he never scored on me. He barely ever won any matches. 15 years later, I was his intern. As a guy, he became the director of a guidance department, and I went the roundabout way through my education, got a master's in guidance counseling. Payback time. I was his intern. So just the fact that you did it is going to mean something to people.
Yeah, no, I absolutely. So let's let's fast forward to today and just, really start talking about, fit presenter, and talk about some of the things that you're doing in this space.
The two constants in my life, you've heard a little bit about me where I've gone different places. The two constants have been fitness, whether being in the gym or in sports, and speaking, teaching, presenting, that type of work. Those have always been the two things that have been constant. I was a journalist in the Marines. Okay, when I got out, I went to work installing exercise equipment around the same time I joined Toastmasters. Those two parallels have always been there. And I love teaching. I was teaching at a language institute here in Peru, doing very well. I said, there's something bigger. I said, if I'm doing the same work 20, 30 years from now, due respect to teachers who make a career out of it, I said, what's the point? I should be training my replacement at this point. So I got certified as a world-class speaking coach. There's about 300 of us in the world. And most people are doing it for the corporate world. That's where the money is. I said, I'm not interested in corporate. I've got to think for fitness. I said, the fitness industry. The fitness industry needs this because if you work in fitness, people are desperate to know what you know. And most fitness facilities, well over 90%, don't have any kind of workshops or ways for people to come in and learn from the trainers. And if they do, it's usually a guest speaker. They bring in the chiropractor, they bring in some pharmaceutical rep to push some weight loss medication, and the trainers are there saying, yeah, this is pretty cool. The trainer should be the one speaking. And from that, you see a lot of seminars where trainers get up there and read their bullet points, but not real connection and real stories that get people not only motivated, but help them learn. And that's where I created Fit Presenter. And through this journey, we see student athletes, and you and I talked about this. A lot of these athletes think they're going to walk in and get themselves a muffin basket full of $100 bills and call it NIL money. And we've got to educate the student athletes to let them know, even if you're not a blue chipper, Nike and Gatorade are not beating down your door, there's still opportunities for you professional. And it could be a couple $1,000 a semester just to get sponsored. Or it could be, but most importantly, is that career skill when you're done. Because everything I talked about before, all the disadvantages you have, the time and the focus away from the career search, the one advantage you have, which overrides all the negatives, is the ability to speak. Because you have stories to tell that other people don't have, and you have an audience, people want to hear it. So develop that skill while you're a student so you can use it later. And that's how you and I met, because we're on these platforms to get students to develop their careers. As Harvey McKay says, dig your well before you're thirsty. So when you graduate with a tangible degree and the intangibles from sports and from speaking that nobody can teach you unless you go out and get it yourself.
Yeah, that's great. And I think, I mentioned I have another podcast called NIL for You, and it's all about like education in the NIL space. And I think there's definitely a need for that. I mean, there's the speaking part of it. There's the social media part of it. How do you handle yourself? It's just really important to present yourself the right way, because that's ultimately, you're kind of starting a business. You are an entrepreneur as a student athlete, when you're getting into NIL. And you're right, there are a lot of opportunities out there. I think everybody hears about the was it Sherrod Sanders and Libby Dunn and all the top athletes, but there's opportunities out there for everybody. So is that do you work specifically with schools at all on that, or like with the individual athletes and kind of teaching ways to help them through that whole process?
Stay tuned. It's still a bit of a tough coconut to crack. I'm working with a student athlete now. I don't want to say too much, but I'll say he plays volleyball, and he's going through a tough time medically, and he's continuing his treatment while he trains and he competes. And he said, I want to motivate people with my story. And so many people in that situation, we just describe all the things going wrong in their lives and how I didn't give up and I went for it. But now you're going to be known for that one thing forever. No matter how great or how extreme that one thing is, you're going to be known for it forever. But if you have a central theme where your problems today are a piece of that, you can carry that. The message goes a lot further and wider. If you have a central belief, and then the story is secondary to that.
Yeah, that's very interesting. That's great tips there from Coach Mike. Everybody, pencil those in. About it does make sense that it's not the incident, because you're right. I mean, it could be just something where somebody was a hero for one incident, but maybe they're a hero because they're a good person or whatever. Like you're saying, it's just to continue with that theme. So, how do people typically work with you? Is it all is everything online? Are you dealing with people in person too?
I prefer to do it online. I never thought I would hear myself say that. But I prefer to work online because you still have a little bit of a buffer. In the speech coaching world, a lot of people come from show business. They're actors, they're comedians, and they teach you how to be on stage. And a lot goes into the hand gestures, these TED Talks. I've seen people pay a fortune for TED coaching. And so I know somebody in particular, I bet she paid $1,000 to learn how to go like this with her. You can't even see me. Well, to go like this with her hand and this special gesture so she can put it on her sizzle reel. And you get nothing of value. Where we work online, we put our work on content. In fact, some of it is through email. I look over your material when we tweak it first. Then we get on a call. You send me a video, and I watch it on Zoom, and I freeze it. I usually wait till you're doing a funny face, and then I pause it and say, let's go. But we go on content first. And that's another important thing. People say, oh, I want to get over my stage fright. You'll get over your stage fright. You're an athlete. You're nervous in your sport. You get over it. You'll get over your stage fright. Working with me online anywhere in the world because content matters first.
No, that's great. And so how can people find you?
They can find me at my website, fitpresenter.com. That's fit-presenter.com. Also on LinkedIn. I believe that's how you and I connected, LinkedIn. And also, well, we'll see about Alumni Direct, how we're going to work that, and you'll probably find me there as well.
Yeah, there you go. That's great. We appreciate that. And you could find us on alumnidirect.com. And you could follow the show on our YouTube channel as well as across all the different podcast networks. And I was talking to Mike a little bit offline. It's every time I have these episodes and I'm just talking to athletes, and it's just that common theme because it's I'm talking to men, women, across all different sports, and there's a lot of people struggling, but there's people that want to help you out there. So certainly, I think tuning in and growing this viewership and listener base, because I think there's some great, I always call them the nuggets, but there's some great nuggets that you can get out of it. But definitely appreciate your time, Mike. This has been great, and I encourage people to reach out to Mike, get into that Coach Mike in the speaking career there, and I think it's something that definitely helps athletes out. So it's been great, everybody, and look forward to our next show.
Thank you.